Thank you for being here, all of you. If you don't know me, I'm Dr. Ethan Pedersen from Connecticut State, and also the president of the Connecticut chapter of ASPA, American Society for Public Administration. Each of you who registered this morning should have gotten a little packet that has information about today's program, listing of the panelists, but also an application form for ASPA. If you're not currently a member, we encourage you to join. Okay, we have to join according to our vice president. And I agree. But we also invite you to, if you want to find out more about us, in addition to what you hear today, we have a website, www.aspakt.org. We invite you to take a look at that. It has a listing of our upcoming events, programs. We'll be having another, I'll put in a brief blurb, we'll be having a program a little more than a month from now on Thursday, November 8th on referendums in municipalities, and we hope you'll come to that as well. You'll find that interesting too. And we'll be sending out information about that in the near future. But without further ado, so that's the program. Even though one of our panelists has yet to arrive, let me introduce our Vice President of Connecticut ASPA, Lyle Ray, who will moderate the panel and introduce our panelists.
Thank you very much, Paul. Yes, mandatory membership. You gotta have the right attitude. Sort of like vacuum cleaner sales. Escape. Welcome to our panel on shared services in Connecticut, experiences and outlook. This is a very auspicious or opportune time, as you'll hear from our speakers, in terms of looking at the topic again of shared services. It's actually, just as a couple of introductory remarks, a major international and national trend. About 5 years ago, I was in Singapore, and the government of Denmark was there talking about shared back office functions for Danish towns. So it's one of those things. I think we got towns that are old. Try 9th century chartered Royal Danish towns. Oh, with a name like that, you might have a clue. And so the government basically woke up in the morning and said, we're doing 900 finance systems, 900 web pages, 900 asset management systems. This is nuts. And said, we're not doing that. But, and they had the same kind of thing we have, they realized there's absolutely no way you're going to get rid of a village that was there in the 9th century. So consolidating villages is a non-starter. So this sounds familiar to me in terms of territory. So what the government did was a very interesting thing. They had a combination of information technology infrastructure at the back end that they shared, and then they had major incentive grants for towns to work together. But the towns were always the same. You had the smiling council chairs, the royal seals going back to the 9th century. But behind the curtain was one basic integrated personnel finance asset management system that saved a great deal of money. And that was a very interesting aspect. And around the country, the United States, New Jersey, for about 11 years, has had a very large shared service incentive program that has been changed in several formats of various governors, but continues and has a great following. To our north, Maine has $1 million on the table. We've outdone them, which we'll talk about. Protein Shark is the giants for shared service incentives in the state of Maine. Maine is, although it's a county-based system, which we're not allowed to talk about in Connecticut, they still have shared service issues, a major proportion, and they have a major program that the current governor has put on the table for towns to work together. Michigan, Arizona, many other states are doing shared services. So it's an interesting aspect, because I think the issue, as we can get into the discussion, is the whole issue of economies of scale, which is on the one hand, which is if you're very, very small, having an enterprise software system doesn't work. On the other hand, people want to be very closely related to elected officials. Historical boundaries are very important. Just ask the three towns that fight about who's first in Connecticut. So historical and connectivity to people is very important. So there's always this trade-off between making things big and efficient or having personal and intimate contact with your elected officials and knowing what's going on in your town. And typically, if we have the money, we tend to pick, if we can afford it, we like to have personalized small services. And so the question with shared services is, how does that balance strike in Connecticut? So it's going to be a very interesting time. The point that I've made a number of times that's worth mentioning, and the reason we're here today is arithmetic. I used to joke when I was a county manager that I used to learn advanced mathematics in graduate school. I took 6 or 7 courses. I found that the most important mathematics was learning to count to 3 on a 5-member board. It's a joke, you can laugh, or you can think it worse. But the arithmetic of this problem is that grant lists go up 1 or 2% a year if you're lucky, and your operating expenses go up 6 or 7%. He's not even smiling at the fact that he lives this every day, so many of you do. And that arithmetic is why we're here. If your revenues are growing up 1 or 2% a year, and your expenses are going up 6 or 7% a year, then we're all kind of put in the box of figuring out more efficient ways of doing services. So that's the driver here, which is very important. And the other part, of course, is people's resistance to taxes. Tax increases are very unpopular, and that arithmetic of 1% or 2% grant list growth, 6 or 7% operating increase growth for healthcare and everything else is going to drive us in the future. So it's my pleasure to introduce the panel members. I'm going to introduce the 2 panels that are here, and we certainly hope to have Representative Sharkey from American joining us shortly. Our first presenter needs no introduction. I think that's almost true. David Lavasser to my right, in a geographic sense, of course. He has served more than this. I'm waiting for you to say that. There's nobody to my left, which is kind of scary. Let's not move on to our stable. Mr. Lavasser has served as Undersecretary of Intergovernmental Policy at the Office of Policy Management since 2001 in the state of Connecticut. He previously served as first selectman of the town of Killingworth. He had to training, I kept saying Killingsley, is the Killingworth, now I've got it right, from 1995 to 2001. He received his bachelor's degree from the University of Connecticut and a JD from Western New England College of Law. Where is that? Springfield, Massachusetts, right through. He is admitted to practice before the Connecticut Bar and served in the U.S. Army Judge Advocate General's Corps. His staff is responsible for submission of the Conservation and Development Policies Plan for Connecticut 2005 to 2010. This is our major blueprint for local governments for land use development in the state. And he represents or is represented the Secretary of OPM, Robert Gennari, on a number of boards and commissions, including the Municipal Finance Advisory Commission, the Connecticut Regional Institute for the 21st Century, the Water Planning Council, and the Blue Ribbon Commission on Property Tax Burdens and Smart Growth Incentives. He's also recently been appointed to serve as Responsible Growth Coordinator, which I hope we will talk about in a little bit, overseeing the Office of Responsible Growth and in accordance with the terms of Governor Rell's Executive Order 15, which was issued on October 6th of last year. So he will speak to us first. Second, let us see Paul Hutchin, who we are working on some projects together in the world here, because district health is an important area. Mr. Hutchin has a background in education and Master of Public Health from the School of Medicine at UConn, up the road there in Farmington. Bachelor of Science in Public Health from the School of Health Services, University of Massachusetts, Amherst in 1976, and Associate in Environmental Health at Northwestern Connecticut Community College. He serves as Director of Health for the Central Connecticut Health Districts in Wethersfield from 1996 to the present. And this is the local health department for 4 towns. We have a real live shared service here with a population of 94,000. The district is overseen by a 10-member Board of Health, and as Director of Health is responsible for planning, coordinating, and administering a wide range of public health and environmental services, from preparing annual budgets, the overall strategic planning and implementation process. More recently, things such as bioterrorism planning, policy pursuit, or Homeland Security planning in the region. Prior to that, he was Director of Health in Wethersfield from 1982 to 1996, and Health and Sanitation Officer on the Holland America Cruise Line. That sounds like fun. That was boy, getting paid to be on the boat. This is an amazing thing to aspire to. Most of us are paying dearly to be on those boats. 1978 to 1981. Of course, if they get sick, they come to you. So we're going to be hearing from him on the issue of district health. So having set up the topic of shared services and why we need it, it's all about arithmetic. 1% growth, 6% cost increases. I'd like to turn it over to Mr. Jonas in welcoming Undersecretary David Lavasser.
Thank you, Lyle. I think does anybody else find it ironic that someone of my size is charged with responsible growth? Although I can attest to a day-to-day battle with sprawl on a personal basis. Well, what is regional service sharing? Because that's really what we're all talking about here. And the answer depends upon who you ask. Some believe it's a smart way for local governments to do business. Others believe it's a threat to local control and autonomy. What kinds of decisions and services are currently provided regionally? Well, there's a number of initiatives out there. There's everything from collaborative purchasing, and we've seen things as fuel oil cooperatives and bootstrapping on state contracts, filling existing service gaps. Mutual aid agreements are a prime example of that, and sharing equipment. There's also a need to provide enhanced services, particularly in a lot of your rural communities. So we've seen regional animal control programs. And then, of course, there's always providing new services, and we've seen household hazardous waste collection facilities organized along a regional basis. Why is it so contentious? Well, I'm preaching to the choir here, but obviously there's a number of folks in society who have a misunderstanding or fear of intermediate-sized regional government. Of course, Connecticut has a strong home rule tradition. Talk about property tax revolt. I mean, we're a nation that began because of property tax revolt, or tax revolt. The last person who tried to impose heavy taxation was about 3,000 miles away from here. So, and of course, there's mistrust of the statement. And Lord knows I've heard it and said it. I'm from the government. I'm here to help you. And of course, there's a fear of loss of local decision-making control, and that's really the crux of it. If you use the term county government in Connecticut, it almost is like a lightning rod. And a lot of people believe that's because we eliminated county government back in the late 1950s. The reality is there was nothing to eliminate. Connecticut's never had a strong intermediate government level. The reality is, prior to the 1950s, the only areas that the county really governed on were a few county roads, the judicial system, which has been taken out of their purview, and quite frankly, local welfare, orphanages and things like that. And so, quite frankly, when it was eliminated, there wasn't much to eliminate. But if you use the term voluntary regional cooperative ventures in the state of Connecticut, people aren't quite as opposed to working together. And I would submit that we have a bunch of them. Regional cooperation is alive and well in this state, and the proof in the pudding is this. A publication put out by the Advisory Commission on Intergovernmental Relations, and it's called Local Government Cooperative Ventures in Connecticut. These were the ones that were cataloged in 2000. They've done updates for this, and if you want to see this report, because hard copies of it are very dear, thanks to Executive Order 15, which was signed about 6 years ago, you can go to the OPM website, which is www.opm.ct.gov. Click on Publications and Reports, scroll down to Cooperative Ventures, and click on it, and you will see all of the Cooperative Ventures reports. And while I'm mentioning the ACIR, the fine organization that they are, I would be remiss. I told Paul this was the price of admission for getting me here. We are having a symposium at the end of this month, right across the street in the Student Union at Central on October 30th from 7:45 a.m. to about 12:30. It's co-sponsored by the ACIR, the Office of Policy and Management and the League of Women Voters, and the title of the program is Municipal Shared Services, The Road Ahead. So obviously this is a topic that's near and dear to a number of us. What are the problems with Connecticut's experience with cooperative ventures? Well, they're very idiosyncratic, and that each venture is designed to fill a particular limited niche. Each venture is organized differently. Each venture has different players. Each venture has different service area boundaries. Each venture has a different level of authority. But is this model working in Connecticut? Absolutely. The thickness of that book alone shows that there are a lot of efforts out there to try to do things in a more streamlined fashion. And of course, we all know the reasons for this. Increased cost of providing local services, and an increasing understanding of demands on federal and state funding. What do I mean by that? In the state of Connecticut, probably remember we had this unseemly little event back in 2001, 2002, where our revenues dropped off significantly. And it caused a number of problems in the government, including some layoffs, some early retirements, downsized a lot of government. And the reason for that was because people did not realize at the time how dependent our local income tax was on capital gains and on corporate bonuses. When the economy took a nosedive south and corporate bonuses drove down and the market took a downturn, suddenly a huge void appeared in our income tax collections. And so we had a structural problem that still exists in there. So we're very much dependent upon the economic well-being of the country as a whole. On the other hand, the federal government has some problems, and I'm going to do a plug for somebody that Miles brought to the state a couple of times, David Osborne, who put out a book called The Price of Government. And Mr. Osborne predicts that in the not-too-distant future, a little over a decade, the entire federal budget will be consumed by Social Security, Medicare, and debt service. Now, what does that mean to a state like Connecticut? Well, we don't see a lot of federal dollars. Well, we do. The problem is you don't see them. They go into, quite frankly, transportation budgets to the tune of billions of dollars. If that money dries up, the state of Connecticut's going to not only have to deal with the structural issue that I mentioned, but it's going to have to fill that void if we're going to keep our infrastructure functioning. And that's going to have repercussions on all of you folks that work in local government, because you guys are going to have to come up with even more money or figure out ways to do things in a more efficient fashion. That's the type of thing that's really driving the discussion. We're really at a seminal moment right now. Obviously, we've seen an increased cost both of programs and additional services. I don't have to preach to the choir that we have a heavy municipal reliance on local property taxes. The other thing that's been a huge driver is, quite frankly, the increase in local property values over the last decade. It's been huge. And that has caused some real problems among the taxpaying community. And of course, this has led to property taxpayer revolts and, of course, numerous attempts to pass local budgets. There's also an increased appreciation for economies of scale and a conscious balancing of cost versus local control. What tools assist the town in making decisions and working together and moving ahead regionally? Well, there's two pieces of legislation that were passed back in 2000. The first one, which is codified as Section 7-148BB, that's in void of the Connecticut General Statutes, allow agreements between municipalities to share revenue received for the payment of property taxes. And Section 7-148CC, as in Charlie, of the Connecticut General Statutes, allow municipalities to jointly perform municipal functions. That is, two municipalities or more together can do anything that a municipality is authorized to do by state statutes individually. This year, Public Act 07239, an act concerning responsible growth, charges OPM to review regional tax-based revenue sharing models and look at the establishment of regional asset districts and issue a report by July 1, 2009. So we have our work cut out for us as well. Finally, and I think Lyle alluded to this earlier, is this year we have a new grant program that's been established. It's called the Regional Performance Incentive Program. And there's $8.6 million of surplus money from the state of Connecticut set aside in the budget to encourage the regional provision of services already performed individually by municipalities in order to encourage cost savings either by the delivery of service or by collective purchasing. Grant recipients will be one or more RPOs. Applications are due by December 1st of this year. And we have to get the money out the door no later than June 30th, 2008, because the surplus money will lapse if we do not. So we've been riding around and talking to all of the regional planning organizations, and a lot of the chief elected officials want to know about this. So we're hoping this will really give a shot in the arm to encourage more and more regional incentives and programs around the state. Thank you.
Thanks.
Paul, you ready to roll?
Yes.
All right, let's have that, and then we can have an open discussion. Wait for our final speaker and or
Good morning. My name is Paul Hutchin, as was mentioned. I'm the Director of Health for the Central Connecticut Health District. I was asked to be here today to talk a little bit about health districts, and what I'll do is talk a little bit about the history of the health districts in Connecticut, the funding for health districts, and then a little bit about the benefits that health districts offer. I'll have to keep this fairly accurate, as I have a lot of eyes on me that I recognize here. Former boss Lee Erdman, it was actually a board member when the health district formed. I have Roger here from Berlin, town manager, former director of health, and so forth. So I guess I'll have to be fairly accurate in what I say. It was mentioned that one of the reasons these cooperative efforts work well in Connecticut is when they're voluntary, if it's a voluntary effort. And that's what a health district is. It's not something that's mandated. It is a voluntary effort. It's a voluntary getting together of municipalities to offer local public health services. So we are a local health department. We are, I call it a quasi-governmental, but really are a governmental entity with all the duties and the powers of a local health department. And it is a voluntary effort, and taking advantage of, as was mentioned, the economies of scale, hopefully. That's the goal. A little bit about the history of health districts. There are 20 health districts in the state of Connecticut currently. There have been some that have come and gone, but right now we have 20. There are 30 local health departments in the state of Connecticut that have full-time directors of health. So there's 20 health districts, and there are 30 local health departments that have full-time directors of health, and then there are about the same number that have a part-time director of health, with possibly full-time staff, but the director is part-time. So that's about 80 local health departments in the state of Connecticut out of the 169 towns. And so there are some health districts that have up to, I think it was, when I looked at the list, 18 municipalities or boroughs, because a borough counts as an independent entity. So there are some health districts that have up to 18 municipalities or boroughs that are part of them. And that one happens to be the Torrington Area Health District, really the largest one in the state. The first health district was formed in 1966, and that was actually the Westport Weston Health District, still in existence today. And this is, by the way, a health district is when two or more towns or a borough and town of want to get together and join to form a district, and again offer that local public health component for the towns. We are authorized to exist under the general statutes of the state of Connecticut. I took a look at those. There were some dates in there from 1949. I'm not sure exactly what that meant. If there was something that happened back then, I really didn't go back and look at that. But certainly back to 1966, when the first health district formed, that formed because there are statutes that exist that allow a health district to be formalized. There's a process by which a municipality joins that health district. There's a process by which board members are elected or appointed, I should say, by municipalities, all of which is spelled out in the statute. And that statute numbers are 19A 240 through 246. So in there, you'll see all of the language on how a district can form, how it is to be governed. We are overseen by a board of health, and the board of health is determined by population. So every town that's a member, if you have 10,000 population or part thereof, you get a board member. So that's why our board membership now is 10. We have 94,000 people in the district. So those 10 people are appointed by the local governing body. And in our case, each of the 4 towns is a council manager form of government. So the councils in each town appoint their representative to the board. So it's either, in our case, 3 reps or 2 reps. The budget is established by the board. They have that authority to create the budget for the health district. We then present that budget to the member towns. So we'll adopt our budget usually at our February board meeting in time to give our report to the member towns so that they have opportunity to incorporate what we're requesting into their operating budget in passage for sometime maybe in April or May. There are all of the duties and responsibilities of this district health department, again, are spelled out. So what we do is essentially the same as what a local health department would do, but it's in this cooperative effort. There's also opportunity to withdraw from a district, and that's spelled out in the statute. So this is not something that you're bound to or tied to. You're going to be tied to it. You would be tied to it for a period of time, but there is the ability to withdraw from a district. And so there have been cases where towns have decided, based upon the service that they're getting or maybe the cost that they're paying or whatever, they've chosen to withdraw from a district that they're part of, maybe join another district, or maybe offer local public health services independently. A little bit about the funding. One of the reasons that districts are really increasing in Connecticut, the latest district was the Connecticut River Area District, which is down along the shoreline where the Connecticut River comes in, and I forget exactly all of the towns there. There were 3 or 4 towns about a year and a half ago that formed the Connecticut River Area Health District. That was the most recent one. One of the reasons I think that we're seeing more of this, and we formed in '96, and there have been a few more that have formed since we did. The Eastern Highlands Health District, the Chatham Health District, the one down there on the shoreline. I think maybe one more, Trumbull Monroe, formed a health district. So there have been a few since '96 when we formed, and I think one of the reasons is the financial incentive from the state. We received what's called a per capita grant from the state health department, and that has been running at about $1.66 per capita for health districts. And that is considerably more than what a town would receive with a full-time director of health, and considerably more than what a town would receive if they had a part-time director of health. There's really 3 levels of funding, if you will, for local health departments from the state. And this year, the legislature actually improved that per capita grant for local health departments, but just for districts and just for municipalities with full-time directors of health. They really didn't change the number for the part-time towns. So we went from a level of $1.66 per capita to $2.08 per capita. That is a financial incentive in many cases for these municipalities to look at the district option. So we incorporate that into our budget. Other funding sources, the primary funding source for a district is the membership fee. And right now we have a membership fee of $4.06 per capita. And there's a range of membership fees. If you look at these 20 health districts that are in the state of Connecticut, there's a range of membership fees from just under $4 per capita up to $17.30 per capita, which actually is the Westport Weston Health District. No surprise down there, I guess. But that, it's interesting when you look at the services and all. It's not dictated. It's not there are differences between health districts, and that's probably a prime example, particularly when you look at a health district that oversees school nursing services, has public health nursing services, has health clinics, and so forth and so on. The cost per capita is likely going to be greater, and that's what you see down at Westport Western. Kind of that full range of services. We don't have that at Central Connecticut. So that's the primary source of funding for us is that per capita membership fee. We then add to that our state per capita grant at $2.08 now. And then really the third major source of funding for us is our permit fees. We charge a fee to licensed restaurants, motels, public pools, and so forth. And so that's our other primary source of funding. So those 3 sources together are really what allow us to operate. That's where the money comes from. What are the benefits of a health district? I think we take advantage of that economies of scale, and of course there's only one director, that's me, and we're able to provide services on a district-wide basis and hopefully show that we can do that in an efficient manner. We've made, I think, significant improvements to the municipalities that are members. If I look back in '96 and compare that to where we are today, there are a few areas where we've been able to show significant improvement. One is just going from a department that was part-time, for example, in one of the member towns, to being able to offer services 5 days a week with staff available 5 days a week. That didn't exist before the health district was formed. And that is a common occurrence around the state of Connecticut, particularly probably down in that Connecticut River area and other areas. They aren't able to necessarily, a municipality may not be able to afford someone 5 days a week full-time, and they have a part-time employee or a contracted service. A health district comes along and allows that to expand to full-time. So that's one of the things that we did, just getting full-time services. Other areas that we've been able to make significant improvements in is health education or community health services. We now have on staff a part-time health educator and a community health coordinator. What we've been able to do is reach out and apply for grants and begin to offer services under those grant programs and have the in-house resources necessary to implement those. So we've been very successful with our block grant programs. We get federal funding through the block grant. We have direct educational programs and screening programs that we offer through that. We've also been successful in very recently, within about last year or so, obtaining a USDA grant, a grant from the National Association of City and County Health Officials. We've recently received an asthma grant. It's a 2-year grant. So we're able to, with the staff that we have, apply for these grants and bring these programs to the communities that we serve. That asthma grant, by the way, is really within the capital region. So we're going to be implementing an asthma education program with school nurses in the 2-year period. We are going to train nurses at 50 different elementary schools on asthma control, and that's actually throughout the region. This is a continuation of a program that was overseen by the East Hartford Health Department, and now we've taken that over for a 2-year period. So that's exciting news, and we hope that really gets out into the community, into the school system, and with these nurses trained, assisting these students that have been diagnosed with asthma. We're really hopeful for that. Our community health coordinator is working on issues. Youth violence is one of them recently, and we've done an assessment in all 4 towns. And of course, when we implement a project, we implement a program, we have to think 4 communities, not just one. What we do, we try to do district-wide. Emergency preparedness was mentioned. We are a planning region in the state of Connecticut, one of the 42 planning regions. So we have on staff a full-time public health emergency preparedness coordinator who's responsible for preparing the emergency plan for public health for the 94,000 population. So if we had a bioterrorism incident, if we had to implement a mass vaccination center or a point of distribution for medications or something like that, we have to be prepared for that. We're working with the emergency management directors in each municipality. They each have their own, so there are 4 of them and so forth, and chiefs of police and all of that for emergency planning. All of which, I mention all of this because when you're working just in one municipality and maybe you're one employee with a secretary or a director of health and a secretary, it makes it really difficult for that municipality to afford maybe some of these added benefits here that I think that's where we really made improvements for the communities, is bringing these additional services. We also have to meet our mandate. We have mandated services, the communicable disease control, all of the environmental health work that we do with food inspections, the restaurants, the daycares and motels, and so forth. That has to continue also, and we have on staff the sanitarians and the environmental people to do that. And that's another area I think that the towns benefit from, is having that coverage all the time. We've been able to, we've had many incidences recently where we've taken staff assigned to other towns, and we might have to get together 3 or 4 of us and address a particular incident. For example, an outbreak at a food service establishment. We've had incidents recently where we have to go out and investigate that outbreak, and there might be 20 people that have become ill, certain members of the staff of the restaurant plus the customers. And the work involved in not only regulating the facility and ensuring that the facility is doing all that it should do to control, but we also have to interview workers, and we have to work to collect samples and deliver them to the laboratory and all of that. Quite difficult when you're one person, but if you have the ability to draw from the staff and we can put 3 or 4 people on that project, well, now we can get that work done in a timely manner the way it should be done. So I think that's a great benefit to the towns, to be able to have that resource available to them in the event of something happening. Thank you.
Thank you for 2 good presentations. Any word, Paul, on Plan A?
They have not been able to reach.
We have an A. We
Not know where. Yeah.
Is that A or bad? I don't know. I'll let you decide.
Yeah.
So let's throw it open for general questions and answers. Just, I think, a couple of things in terms of themes you just heard. The points that Undersecretary Glasser mentioned, of course, with the tone he uses for self-defense in dark alleys here, is that this is not new, and that there's a very large inventory of already work in progress or work done on shared services in the state. I think that's an important aspect. This is not totally new ground by any stretch. It's building on a large foundation. Representative Guggens does the same thing, which is a piece in our time when she chaired the ASAR, basically indicated that it's important to look at what we've got before we proceed. I think that's very helpful. The points that Paul has mentioned, I think, are also very important, and that is sometimes it's not just savings and economies of scale, it's that you're able to offer levels of service that are previously unavailable. When you go from part-time to full-time service during the week, where you now have the capacity to apply for grants than before. So sometimes it's not just savings in the short, in the calculus of dollar reduction, but you have better service levels for the same tax level. And so sometimes that's a second aspect of someone's product. Before I throw it for questions, I just wanted to indicate to you, I think that one of the parts that we might want to get into in the conversation is what's next. I think it's always nice to look at what we have, and the OPM inventory on the website, I commend you to have a peek at. But what's next? We have a grant program on the table, $8.6 million of surplus funds, as Mr. Lavasser says, disappears June 30th of next year if we don't use it properly. But what's next? I mean, many parts of the country have done a couple of things. One is IT. Information technology is kind of a common shared service that gets done. For example, small towns sharing web page development and transactions on the web. If you're a small community, you want to sort of let people buy or pay for their parking fines or animal licenses on the web. That's actually a lot of work to do in terms of transactions and doing web pages, just basic web page design. Another one, of course, is the so-called back office function, which is about as boring as watching paint dry, but actually very expensive and very important. Decent personnel, finance, asset management systems are extremely important. For example, the Governmental Accounting Standards Board rules that we're operating under increasingly require better documentation of what assets you have and how you're managing them. I see a few people nodding here in pain, but we really need these kind of documentation systems much more. And I think every town, one at a time, buying asset management systems, like where's the plow and who's changing the oil in the truck, gets prohibitive at a personal sort of annual documentation level. So that's another aspect, is sort of the back office functions that are going to be, I think, potentially on IT. Then the other aspect going forward that we may want to think about is procurement of information technology. That is buying it. We have a thing called CAMA, computerized asset appraisal systems for property taxes, and it's basically onesie-twosies towns versus the vendors. And I'm not saying anything bad about IT vendors, but it's better when we're together, put it that way. So joint specifications of what we want, and purchasing, even if you roll into the contract whenever you're ready to change. Same with finance systems, setting the terms of what you want, clearly, and then rolling into it whenever you buy. That joint procurement thing is pretty much analogous to what you were talking about. Newington can't drop everything and have their IT director work for 6 months on the specifications program for finance. It's not going to happen. So in a way, I think it helps to make the procurement system a lot better. So those are a few things in IT, but the back office functions, shared procurement, the kinds of things, documentation for assets and so on. The other aspect, I think, is the issue of actual customer relationship management. This is a horrible buzzword. CRM, which is one of those wonderful things. But if you have a barking dog, broken street light, pothole, pick a topic, how does that get handled in municipal service? Hartford has 311, where you can call up and talk to a call center group. There's other ways of doing this. I mean, sometimes you can simply do it on the web. If you want to amuse yourself, look up the city of Minnetonka, Minnetonka, like Tonka Toys, that's where it came from, Minnetonka, and it's Minnetonka Mike, M-I-K-E, with a little microphone homunculus. Somehow the staff had to vote on that one. It was kind of weird. Anyway, but if you look at this, you can submit any kind of complaints you want about burned out streetlight, barking dog, pothole, etc. And you get a PIN number when you put in the complaint, just like a bank PIN number, and you can track the status of what happened here, barking dog, broken streetlight, pothole, on the web. And what's interesting about that from the management perspective, it's similar to the 311 system, is that automatically gets routed to the right place. Because one of the aspects of a government that we haven't talked about here is, you mentioned idiosyncratic, which is a really nice way of putting it, which is only one person knows how it is organized in each town. They're not talking. So I defy you to know where to call for a streetlight, because when I lived in the Midwest, it was classic. My My street light was the city, the side street was the county, and the major one was the state. So depending on where it was, within a 2-block radius, it was 3 different places to call for a burned out street bulb. Well, the average citizen has no clue what to do with it. Or in some towns, animal control is handled one way, maybe a joint venture among several towns, maybe an animal control officer, etc. The point about things like 311 or the customer relationship management system, like maybe if you look at the city of Minnetonka in the Midwest, is you don't need to know. You just type in English, barking dog, broken light, pothole, and then you get a confirmation number, and then that is routed automatically to the right person in the public works department, animal control department, or what have you. I think that's another part of the aspect, and it's basically adding value to the service system. You're not just, well, you're also relieving a lot of people from many, many, many phone calls. Your call volumes fall dramatically with the 311 or with a customer relationship management system, but you're getting it done better, faster, and cheaper. And from a management point of view, there's a number of you or chief operating officers and town managers, that stuff shows up as a report on your desk. How responsive are we to citizen complaints? So you got this many burned out. It gives you a pattern of what kind of complaints you're getting. Gives you a pattern of the responsiveness of your current system to them. And again, those systems can be very, very low cost. So there's a variety of ways I think the IT world and the customer relationship world are going forward. And then the point Hutchins made, I think, is the one that's the hardest to do, and that's getting people to work together in teams rather than individually. And that gets to be very hard. Where someone says, let's do joint animal control with Millington and Weathersfield, and all you need is one person in the public hearing to get up and say, I don't want to drive all the way to Millington to get my cat. And suddenly it gets very difficult. So the people side of this, whether it's dispatch, where you're merging bargaining units in public safety units, those kinds of things get a lot stickier. But the easier behind the curtain stuff, I think, information technology is picked in many, many areas of the country for simple reasons. It's just a heck of a lot easier to get done with very little dislocation of people. When you start moving people together, and I'm sure it was a challenge in the public health district, maybe you just didn't have any people and they added new ones. But when you start putting together, sitting down and saying, well, we need to merge 4 bargaining units of dispatch, all with different bargaining reps and different contract cycles, if you had any here, which I don't, you'd be pulling it out. So part of this, I think, is as we go forward, I just want to sort of put our folks on the spot here of what they think is next, more broadly, and then in the specific field of public health districts. What's next, I think, is one of the things I'd like us to sort of turn our attention to, because there's a lot that's been done, a lot being done now, but the question is, what's next? Because I don't see any abatement in people's attitude toward property tax increases or that arithmetic I mentioned of 1 or 2% groundless growth and 6 or 7% operating growth. That vice is not going anywhere. So the question is, what's next? And perhaps throw it to questions, please.
Thank you, Lyle. It was a great segue to my question for both Dave and Paul, and that is, after 40 years, it amazes me that we still have some 80 towns that don't provide any health services at all, apparently. And the question is, what will it take? I mean, public health is an increasingly important service. And so what will it take to incent the other 80 towns, I assume mostly small towns in Connecticut, to provide this critical service?
Well, I don't think it's 80. What I was saying was that we have the 20 health districts covering X% of the population. I forget what that number is. And then we have about 30 local health departments like Hartford, New Britain, Danbury, that have a full-time director of health and, of course, a full range of services. So that's the 20 plus that 30 is 50. It's the other about 30 local health departments that are the very small communities, for the most part, that have a part-time director of health that probably have limited services. A recent example of a change, for example, was the town of Cromwell. Cromwell is about 13,000 people, and they had a part-time director of health forever. And just recently, they appointed an individual to be the first full-time director of health for the town of Cromwell. So that's a recent change. And we're seeing more and more and more of that. If you look at the last 5 years, those numbers that I just mentioned have changed dramatically. the number of towns that had part-time directors that have either gone into a district or appointed someone full-time has changed significantly. So I think the good news is we're seeing that's a recent trend, I think, and I think it's because, well, now we have some incentive money there that's better than it was before, and I think there's a recognition that, especially with emergency preparedness coming along, that there's a need to have a strong public health component in the municipality, and how to do that. And one of the ways is partnering up and forming the districts. I think something else that's coming that the NACHO is working on, the National Association of City and County Health Officials, that one thing that they're working on are standards for local public health, standards of practice for local public health, and eventually certification of a local health department. From what I see in what I've looked at with NACHO, that's about 3 years off. There are at least 2, if not 3, local health departments in Connecticut that are starting on that process now as, I don't know if the term would be a pilot or not, but they've agreed to work with NACHO in implementing and instituting some of those standards and working towards developing essentially the criteria by which certification would be offered. So we have that happening in Connecticut. It's happening nationwide. CADH, the Connecticut Association of Directors of Health, has been looking at standards for years, but the problem has been, how do you do this? You know, there really wasn't a national model. There was no state model. There are no state standards. If you look at the programs and services offered by local health departments, there is a wide range. There are mandates that we pretty much all do, but then there's a lot of this other work that we do that's not mandated. That health education work, community service work that we do is not mandated work. Smart public health is good public health, but it's not mandated, and that varies statewide. So what NACHO is looking at and what CADH is looking at are standards of practice, and what are those minimum levels, and can we then offer certification to a local health department? Some of you, I'm sure, are aware, I know Lee is anyhow, of the certification program that's available for police departments. And quite a rigorous process. Not everyone is certified, but a local police department has, I believe, the opportunity at least to become a certified local police department. So that's what's happening. And I think that's going to make some improvement in local public health in Connecticut, and that might also change some of those municipalities. That might change how some of those municipalities operate that have a smaller department or a part-time director or that kind of thing. Should I mention that? Yeah. Well, I've been asked to talk about an idea that is being looked at in Connecticut for a digital health department. And really what I was proposing, I actually contacted CROG and CADH and asked that we look to see about creating a web-based record management public access program for local health departments, so that all of the data that we collect, all the inspection work that we do, licenses that we issue, all of that could be inputted into a system that would be similar across the board from town to town, health department to health department, and then be accessible to the public. So that through the web you could look at the most recent food inspection for your favorite restaurant, and you could see how they scored and what the violations were and so forth. In Connecticut, I think still there's only one health department, it's a health district, that does this, but I think it's something that we ought to try to make available across the state. Ideally, it would be a great project for the state, but it was never picked up. So maybe part of this money that's available could be used to create this system that we could all use, because we're all using the same public health code. We're all enforcing the same standards. We're all using the same inspection report form. So that's a great base to build from. Yes.
The comment I would make is that as you implement the standards of practice for public health, the inspection of a restaurant, for example, is, as we all know, a moment in time, and is based really on the individual and the person's training and ability to go out and do an inspection. We have had a variety of people do a variety of things and then come up with an answer. So I would suggest that once there are some standards and then there's good supervision, and I'm not sure that all of the health departments and districts have had the level of supervision to really make certain that the people who are doing the inspections, whether it be for a restaurant or something else, have really reached the standard to apply to all. When you start to put out this menu of here's what people had done, just because someone failed inspection today, I mean, we have to look at will they fail tomorrow, and what is the rationale and the health education that goes along with that. I certainly support shared resources in terms of that, but I also think that we have to hire the right people who are trained the right way to do the right thing.
Well, to repeat the comment, in case it didn't get picked up, the need to have trained individuals to have a standard platform from which to operate so that you can relate these reports from jurisdiction to jurisdiction and we're not all over the place with it is critical. Plus, I think, making sure that what we put out there is valuable to the public and you can interpret it to mean something. If I say to you the restaurant scored an 87, you're going to say, yeah, that sounds like a B+. That's pretty good. Well, guess what? They had 2 4-point items that are critical, and the food was out of temp, and there were toxic materials getting into the food or spoiled food, but they scored an 87. And so just a number doesn't work either. So it is, I think, there's a need to change a little bit. We have great standards, if you will, but I think ensuring that we have the training to get an equal base and then to communicate that information to the public so that it's useful. We don't have a rating system in Connecticut. We don't have a good, fair, poor, 4 forks, 3 forks, 2 forks kind of a system. We have a number, and you get a number out of 100. And for many years, the press used to ask the local health departments, me, to give them the numbers. And I would give them the numbers, and they would print this long list of restaurants, and you'd see all the numbers next to it. That's all you got. And then you would say, well, geez, I'm going to go to a place that had a 95 rather than an 88. Maybe you would do that, I don't know. But that doesn't make a whole lot of sense necessarily, because you don't really know. There's a far better way through this web-based system to show exactly what was going on at that facility, and you can make an informed decision. But that's just one area. There's a lot more that you could do. Yes.
If that health district can provide this digital source, what would be the primary method of funding?
Well, what we're looking to do, there are a number of companies out there that sell this software now. And if you look at other states, and North Carolina has a pretty good example. I just looked at it briefly, but I went to the North Carolina website, and I don't know if you go to county and then to towns, but you can find out a restaurant inspection score for any restaurant, I think in the whole state. And so these systems are available from suppliers, from contractors. There are a number of them that have designed these programs. And we're looking to use some of this shared services incentive money to ideally establish across the board that system that all of us could work with. The problem is the funding for the continued maintenance of that system. And right now, there are, I don't believe, any local health departments in the state of Connecticut that utilize a web-based system like this. There are a couple that are really close to going live with a system. And there is a significant annual cost to maintain it. Hope is that rather than one department spending the money to buy the system, maintain the system, if it's the same, maybe the annual maintenance cost would be considerably less, and we could work with that. We have a system that we use now. using a FileMaker Pro database. It was something that was customized actually by a director of health to maintain information, but it's not accessible by the public. It's ours for our use. And this idea that we have is we would probably throw that out and use this new one, and then hopefully have a lower annual maintenance cost. Does that answer your question?
Yes.
Yeah. Yes.
That kind of leads to a follow-up question for Dave, and that is, what criteria will OPM or whatever appropriate state agencies are going to be involved in reviewing these shared services proposals that are going to come in December? What criteria will the state use to determine how to allocate those funds?
Well, there's already a statutory benefit for any region that's a council of government where more than 50% of the municipalities participate. So that's something that the Secretary is asked to give extra consideration to. But quite frankly, the guidance we've gotten is that the more broad-based and the more, we're going to be looking at efficiencies and economies of scale, which quite frankly is why we're asking for a cost-benefit analysis with these two proposals coming in. And the further and more efficient and more broad-based these programs are, obviously the better they're going to score on the sheet. And if they happen to be in a council of government region and more than 50% of the municipalities are participating, I would think that would give it an extra boost.
My question kind of goes backwards for what's next. I was wondering how many, in the tone, as Lyle called it, how many towns, what did it take to get to the health district? Is it a matter of them agreeing to do a dog catcher first and seeing how that goes? Or is the decision strictly financially based to say we can save money, let's do this? What kind of steps are necessary to get to that health district?
You want my candid answer? It's political will and leadership. There are a number of municipalities and who have stepped up, and their leaders have stepped up to the plate because of the fact that there was a critical need, or usually a crisis occurred. We even in our area, we actually had something that was unheard of in the area at the time, but this was 12 years ago. We established an animal control mutual aid program. And so that because most of our animal control officers were part-time, we had a large area, there were 11 towns in the area, and we went into a mutual aid agreement. And we found that animal control is idiosyncratic in the towns. And depending upon the nature of the town, it may be dog-cat oriented, or if you got the killing work, there was a huge horse component. And so when we looked, there were a number of towns that really specialized in larger animals. And so we drew upon that expertise because their animal control officers knew more about horses. But the variety that you ran into really drove the agreement together. So let me get back to the political will issue, because that's correct. We're really at a perfect juncture, because we've got a perfect storm up there. Between the dwindling assets from the state and from the federal government, the fact that property values are going up, demands for local services are going up. We're really at the critical point where political leadership can engage the public without worrying about being written out of town on the rail and say, look, there's a number of things we can do more efficiently. And I went to a conference at Quinnipiac University about, I want to say, maybe 18 months ago. And I was flabbergasted to find out that the entire state of Florida has 64 school districts. We have 152. Now, we all know that when you talk about consolidation, you're not going to lose teachers. You're going to save on the administration load. Because what that 152 districts means is you've got 152 superintendents of schools making well over $100,000 a year. And you may have assistant superintendents of school, maybe multiple, also making that much money. Well, when you take that into the grand scheme of things, that's where the money is being saved. And that's why we really, quite frankly, have to partner with the bargaining units going forward, because they need to have assurances your rank and file are not the ones who are at risk here, because you're still going to need to have a teacher in every classroom. You're still going to need to have the services. You're still going to need the bus drivers to get into schools. We're talking about the administration, the back office functions, if you will. And that's critical. If you look at Connecticut and talk about inefficiency, 169 municipal solid waste disposal programs, 169 departments of public works. I mean, it goes on and on and on. And the bottom line is, taxpayers are upset enough about their property taxes that you can engage them in a conversation. And each day that goes by, and every fiscal year that goes by, there's going to be more and more. Is a tipping point in your town this year? Maybe not. Maybe 2 years down the road. But if you just came off of 5 referendum to get your local budget passed, I would submit you're a lot closer to that tipping point than I realize. And I think that's where the discussion has to be. It's got to be at the local level, and it's got to be based on political will.
Yeah, I agree with that 100%. I think that's somebody whose property taxes went up $1,200 last time we had a revaluation in my town. I think the political will and leadership is important. But let me take it another step. Do you think that the problem could even be cultural? I mean, we have this in terms of with actual people, with actual voters in this area. We have a stigma in New England. We're in New England. We're the land of steady habits. We have 169 municipalities. You basically need a passport to transfer between one or the other municipalities. Is it a fact that it's something that just the people of Connecticut may not want, or the people of a particular town or Fife may not be interested in?
I would submit that argument probably would be more true 50 years ago. If you look at the demographics of the state, there's an awful lot of people who grew up in parts of the country that had a regional outlook for government. But the number of us homegrown nutmeggers staying behind gets fewer every year, and of course with the large outsourcing of the number of our young folks after they graduate college, most of what we're getting into the state, quite frankly, is either immigration with foreign nationals, or quite frankly, it's folks transferring in who are already established and their job is moved, or they're moving a certain career, or they're doing whatever. So you have a much more, I don't want to say educated, I would say informed population next year in Connecticut than we've ever had in the past. And so I would submit that it's the time for the discussion to look beyond that. We're there. And I think these folks can be instrumental in helping local officials get the word out, because they've come from other parts of the country where things are done differently. So, Lee?
Dave, we hope that this regional incentive grant program will be successful. And presuming that it is, what are additional actions that the state can take, either from the governor's office or from the state legislature, that will help encourage the further development of shared services and collaboration going forward?
Well, I think that we've put a huge spotlight, as you know, Lee, on the regional planning organizations this year, more so than we've ever done in probably 20 years. We've increased their operating grant. OPM administers a state grant aid to the regional planning organizations of the state. And for the first time in well over a decade, we've actually increased that fund pool by 55%. We're also hoping that ultimately when a bond bill is adopted, there'll be some money in there for GIS capacity building at the RPO level. And so I think really the state can do a lot to encourage looking at regional perspectives, and I think by shining some money on some of those things, that does that. And that's going to be critical for the other half of that work, the responsible growth path. You know, I've preached the doom and gloom financial forecast from the state and the federal perspective, but the reality is, even if we didn't have that, no state government and no federal government is going to, and no local government is ever going to raise enough money to create 169 economic development machines in a state. So, I mean, it's critical that towns, first of all, I think, and I would encourage this, and people look at me like I have two heads, but municipalities have to have an internal discussion with their electorate about what is our town like? What do we represent? Where do we want to be 5, 10, 20 years down the road? I mean, I'll give you the example of Killingworth. And granted, it was an easy task because the discussion had been going on long before I became first selectman. But Killingworth had roughly 36 square miles. In 1950, it had 600 individuals. By the 2000 census, we had 6,000 individuals. We've gone from roughly 50 miles of town-maintained road to 75 miles of town-maintained road. The people of Killingworth knew, even back in the 50s, that we were never going to be an economic juggernaut. And we knew it for a lot of reasons. Number one is the topography is god-awful. We're the highest point that close to the ocean between Maine and Florida. We sit on top of this large dome of granite called the Killingworth Dome. You're never going to lay pipes in there. You're not going to ever have public sewer or public water. We don't have an airport. We're not on the Sound. We don't have an interstate. We've never had a railroad, and we don't have an airport. So how are we ever going to compete with those municipalities that do? Additionally, back in the 1930s, when Killingworth was really cheap to buy into, only we all purchased about 1,000 acres. The state of Connecticut came in and bought massive swaths of forest land, some of which was turned into Chapel Hollow State Park. Parts of it were set aside as Cockaponset State Forest. And we also had 2 water utilities that came in and bought lots of property because Killingworth exports water, both to the South Central Regional Water Authority and to the Connecticut Water Company. So we had large watershed areas. We had a lot of protected land around that. And we knew that we were going to want to build on that. So we took advantage of the Open Space Grant Program. But we also partnered. We did it intelligently with the water utilities, with the state of Connecticut DEP, so that they maximized and increased their holdings. The water company picked up some more parcels. The town bought some open space. We got a couple of rod and gun clubs running around in Killingworth. We convinced them to put conservation easements on their land. I mean, in the course of a 2-year period, we put almost 3 square miles in permanent open space protection of that 36, building on what we had. So we had a focus, we had to make sure we knew where we were going. And it was real easy. All you had to do was make sure you pick the projects so they built on existing things. But that type of discussion has really got to happen at the community level before you can even have your large regional discussion. Because otherwise, if they haven't had that discussion, and you've got 29 members of CROG, and all of them want to be economic development drivers, it ain't going to work. But we've got to build that regional dialogue. And the only way to do that is from the grassroots up. Because any other attempt, as we learned 230 years ago, usually gets rebuffed rather violently here in New England. So, but I would submit that's the next step, really.
I saw a couple other hands, except maybe this revolt will be throwing a latte in the harbor. Anyway, saw a couple other hands here. Going once. Maybe we can end a little early. I wanted to just say a couple of concluding things and then ask our panelists if they want to have a final word to come out. I think we've heard a number of things that are worth taking away today. I think, first of all, in terms of shared services leadership, that mattered in the past and leadership will matter in the future, which is putting these things on the table and managing a process where the community considers this issue openly and carefully, talk about real alternatives, real options, because it's going to be, pay me now or pay me later, how much are you willing to pay for this, so forth. But I think leadership is the first thing. The second theme, I think, is that it's going to be a voluntary-based system. As Jason was talking about, there is a sort of cranky Yankee element here that you have to continue to consider, which is voluntary participation. State-mandated anything is really going down the wrong way. And as I said, we'll throw a latte in the harbor. That's the next 21st century revolution.
Costs too much.
Yes, it costs more than, what is it now? I think it's a bottle of water costs more than gasoline. But the voluntary aspect of basically having enlightened self-interest towards this is probably, I think, appropriate. I think the third element, one of the reasons that I personally would like to support a continuation of the shared service programs, it takes a little while to get going. We have 9 weeks to get this together. And if you knew there was a pot of money every year on the table as a town, you'd be able to say, well, in 2 years we can do, cats and dogs, and the year after that. And again, don't forget the animals. I mean, the biggest single response we had at the Prague newsletter was a horse rescue component. We had animal rescue. I'm serious. Nothing else. Nobody cares about anthrax or avian flu or anything else. But you rescue a horse in a ravine in April, and suddenly you're a hero. So don't forget the animals. They're very, very important. But an incentive-based system, I think, is going to be another element, which is, I think, having a routine and regular amount of money on the table. It takes time. I mean, you can't go 0 to 60 in 9 weeks. So people would say, okay, if that money's there, we can sort of work toward dispatch. And an example of dispatch, just to give you an example of how these things are connected, the knee bone's connected to the hip bone, is that one of the issues of dispatch is, in many towns, you have the issue of prisoner or detainee holding. And you need one person to sort of watch somebody in a cell. Well, the real issue with dispatch would sort of be necessary to solve first is really what do we do about holding? Do we need sub-regional holding centers? In other words, in Farmington Valley, they want to have one place to hold prisoners so that then they can consolidate dispatch. Otherwise, they can't. So many of these things are connected. Maybe take 5 or 10 years to get going, but if we had a routine, shared services incentive program on the table over time, I think you'd see more. So I think the incentive-based system, the state leadership there is great. The other thing I think is, and this is the comment that was made before about best practices, learning from what works and what doesn't. We have wisdom in the state of Tennessee, the public health districts, the work of the ACIR and others in terms of the past of how this has been done. So I think we need to learn from those best practices in the past. And I think the last point I would make before I throw it open to our panelists for a final word is we're probably going to pick the less painful things first. I'll stand here and make a wild prediction. We're not going to consolidate towns. How's that? So those things are not going to happen. But we can consolidate. Nobody cares about consolidating back offices very much. Buying joint software for personnel finance, kind of boring. Another one that I didn't mention earlier is document management. People forget how much paper gets shuffled and stored. I don't know, maybe anybody knows the number here, but it used to be they used to talk about the price of doing a business letter. All costs in is like $20. You sort of include everything in it. It's unbelievable. Document management's the same thing. Right now, you can get 1 million documents scanned and indexed for $10,000. Sounds like a lot of money, except storing 1 million pages of paper in a heated room costs more than $10,000 over a period of time. So the document management systems with this less painful back office stuff, I think, is probably going to go ahead a lot faster. And I think incentives would help in that. We're not going to be, as I say, merging towns, and I think school districts are a tough nut. So I think that's an important aspect. The other piece, I think, at some point, as I say on this, is continuing the sharing process we started here today, and that is the work that was done by the Advisory Commission on Intergovernmental Relations. But look at the state of art and best practices in the state and see what's next in terms of moving forward. So before we close, I'd just like to turn over to our 2 panelists and thank them very much for coming here today. But if they had any parting words of wisdom before us, that would be great. Or are we all?
I think we're all timed out.
We done?
What
No,
about
Paul's on. I suspect
You
Paul's
think
never
we
done.
should do our full state?
Well, one thing I didn't mention was a fear that came up when the health district was forming, and it came up, I think, with every health district forming, and that is the loss of control.
Absolutely.
And I didn't mention that, but that's the fear that I think citizens had and council members had and other advisory groups had. You've got this system working where the employee reports directly to the chief elected official, the town manager, whatever, and we're going to now switch that around, and they don't work for so-and-so anymore, they're going to work for this board. It just never became an issue. For me, anyhow, and I would say for the most part in others that I talk to. And why is because you just have to be aware of who you represent and the work that needs to be done, in my opinion, anyhow. And so there was that fear of control, but I don't think it ever came to be. There was a fear that, okay, if we have a larger town in the district, they'll want to absorb all the resources, they'll suck everything out, and then the others will be left with nothing, or they'll have 3 board members and we'll only have 2, so they'll always vote to do something that just benefits them and it won't benefit us. I think, for me, my experience, the reality of it has been that when those 10 people are sitting around the table making decisions for the health district, they're thinking 94,000, not 26,000, 29,000. They're thinking 94,000. So it works. Right. And we really never had any major problem that way, but the fear was there actually.
Well, that's an important point. Actually, when we're doing some research on this, we found a shared services plan from the United Kingdom. They did a national review on this, and there were two issues that came to the top. One is leadership to get it done, and the second was loss of control, fears. I mean, so it's not an uncommon issue. Those are both critical, and it's a good oversight. I'm glad you brought that back. Paul, any final words or commercials?
We encourage you all, thank you for coming, we encourage you all to come to our program next month, Thursday, November 8th, on use of referendums.
Referendum in state.
Which will be very interesting. I think ties into a number of these things. One other thing I just throw in, just as a comment, is that one of the valuable things I think I've heard there today was not only the benefits of efficiency that can come out of some of these programs and shared services, but from what Mr. Hutchins said in particular, the benefits of not only able to do things at better cost, but better in terms of superior substance for the program. The way you can get more knowledge, more effective knowledge, better performance.
Right.
I think that's equally valuable and a good selling point. This is not just saving money. You could actually improve what we're able to do by having more knowledge.
Exactly, because the avian flu is coming in.
Right.
Public health workers off on Thursday.
Right.
The birds don't stop. So I think that service levels are very critical aspect.
But thank you to the panelists for a great
Let's thank the panel. Thank you very much.